Have you ever just stopped and wondered, how did I become, well, me? It's this incredible journey that every single one of us is on, a story shaped by millions of tiny moments. And in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the science that tries to make sense of that very story, developmental psychology.
So here's our plan. We'll start with the story of you. Then we'll jump right into that huge debate, nature versus nurture. From there, we'll look at the different lenses psychologists use to see development, talk about what a typical journey looks like, and finally, we'll open up the toolkit to see how they know what they know.
All right, let's just get right into it with the biggest question of all, a question that's about every single one of us.
Really, take a second to think about it. Your personality, the way you think, your relationships, what forces came together to create you? Well, believe it or not, this is the exact question that a whole fascinating field of science is trying to answer.
That field is developmental psychology, and it's basically the scientific story of our lives. We're talking about the whole journey, from how a baby bonds with their parents, to how kids learn to make friends through play, all the way up to how we figure out our own sense of right and wrong. It really ties everything together, our social, emotional, and mental growth across our entire lives.
Okay, so let's talk about the big one. The classic, central debate that has been at the heart of this field for, well, forever. You've definitely heard of it. Nature versus nurture. So the question seems simple enough, right? Are we who we are because of our nature, our DNA and our biology, or is it all about our nurture, how we were raised, our friends, our culture? For the longest time, psychologists were really dug in, picking one side or the other. And to see just how extreme that nurture side could get, just listen to this quote from the psychologist J.B. Watson back in 1930. He literally claimed, "Give me some babies, and I can make them into anything, a doctor, a lawyer, you name it." He was basically saying that our environment is everything. It's a pretty wild claim, right? But here's where things get really interesting. Today, we know it's not that simple. It's not either or. It's more like a constant dance between our genes and our experiences. The official term is coaction. I love this analogy for it. Your genes might hand you the script, but it's your environment that directs the movement.
So to really get a handle on that complicated dance, psychologists look at it through a few different lenses, and each one gives a totally different view of what's going on.
Now, when we say theory, we don't mean just some random guess or hunch. In science, a theory is more like a roadmap. It's a framework built on tons and tons of evidence that helps us explain what's happening and even predict what might happen next. Okay, so first up is the psychoanalytic lens. This is Freud's world. His big idea? That most of who we are is driven by stuff we're not even aware of, our unconscious mind. He used that famous iceberg analogy, where the tiny tip you can see is your conscious mind, but the real powerhouse is the massive part hidden under the water. He also believed our core personality gets pretty much locked in by the time we're 5 or 6. Then you've got the biological perspective, which is almost the complete opposite. This view is all about our genes. It sees our development as a process of just unfolding, kind of like a flower blooming. Our DNA says it's going to be a rose, and the environment is just there to provide the sun and water it needs to grow.
Now, the learning perspective flips all of that on its head. It says, forget the unconscious, forget the genetic clock, let's just look at the outside world. The idea here is that we are a product of what we learn. Simple as that. Every behavior is learned, and because we're always having new experiences, our personality can keep changing throughout our entire lives.
And finally, we have the cognitive lens. People like Jean Piaget championed this view. It sees us, especially kids, as little scientists. We aren't just empty vessels passively soaking up information. Nope. We're actively building our own understanding of the world, constructing more complex ways of thinking as we grow through these predictable stages.
So you can see how each of these lenses gives a totally different answer to our big question. Are we shaped by hidden desires, our DNA, our environment, or the way we think? What's so cool is that the modern answer is, well, it's kind of all of them, working together in a really complex way. Okay, so with all these theories buzzing around, let's get practical. How do psychologists actually track what's going on as we develop? This is a question that pretty much every parent, teacher, and doctor asks at some point, right? Is my kid on track? How do we know what's normal or typical and when we should expect to see certain things happen? Well, one of the main tools they use is something called developmental milestones. These are basically the big skills, things like sitting up on your own or walking, or being able to reach out and grab something, that we expect to see show up within a certain window of time. They act like guideposts on the developmental map.
And these guideposts are super important because they help us distinguish between two very different things. A developmental delay is really about pace. The child is following the map, hitting the milestones in the right order, just maybe taking a slightly slower route. A developmental disorder, on the other hand, is about the pattern. That's when the map itself seems to be getting followed out of order or with some big chunks missing.
So where does all this knowledge about theories and milestones even come from? Let's take a quick peek inside the psychologist's toolkit. Yeah, this stuff isn't just people sitting in armchairs and guessing. It is real science. You start with an idea that you can actually test, something you could potentially prove wrong. Then you have to be super clear and define exactly what you're measuring. After that, you go out and collect data through careful observations and controlled experiments. And, this is the most important part, you publish your findings so that other scientists can try to replicate them, challenge them, and build on them. It's that process that makes this knowledge so reliable.
And what all this careful research has shown us, over decades and decades, is one really profound truth. Our story doesn't just stop. It's not over when we turn 18 or graduate college. We are constantly developing, constantly changing, for our entire lives.
And that brings us full circle, right back to you, because your story, it's still being written every single day. So let me leave you with this question. What experiences, what choices, what relationships are shaping the story of you right now? Because understanding our past is powerful, for sure, but realizing that you're still holding the pen for the next chapter, that changes everything.
Thanks so much for digging into the incredible science of us with me today.